Today, I'm teaming up with one of our educational experts, Jan, to build a powerful custom workflow in Shopify Flow. You'll learn how to create an automation that adds a special welcome gift to customers who place their first order. Jan breaks down the entire process, identifying new customers, tagging orders, adding free items, and setting up team notifications, all without writing a single line of code. Let's get started.
Hey, welcome to this lesson. My name is Jan from Coding with Jan. I'm an educational partner for topics related to Shopify development. And in this video, we are going to be building out our workflow together. Now, as a quick reminder, this workflow is supposed to add a small welcome gift to an order, but only if it's the very first order coming from a new customer. In order to achieve this, we first need to be able to identify that we're indeed dealing with the very first order of a new customer. Then we want to tag the order. We want to add the free item. And lastly, we also want to send an internal notification to the team. I'm excited for this one, should be a lot of fun, and let's dive right in. All right, so then as a first step, we need to select a suitable trigger for our new workflow. And a trigger is the event that starts the workflow. It's an event that we want to react to. For a full list of all the available triggers, you can check out this Help Center article. There are actually quite a few that we can choose from. So for example, we could react to a new collection being created or a product being deleted on the store. But in our case, we want to run our workflow whenever a new order is created. And on this page, we can also find more details regarding this trigger. And the description states that the order created trigger starts the workflow when an order is placed by a customer, which is perfect because that's exactly what we need for our use case. Okay, now beyond finding a suitable trigger that starts our workflow every time a new order is created, we also need to be able to tell whether it's the very first order coming from that customer. And in order to assess that, we need to find some suitable data fields that we can take a look at. When it comes to finding data fields and getting inspiration, there are different ways to go about it. And I would actually recommend combining all of these. So first of all, you can have a look at this page right here about previewing API data that's used in Shopify Flow. And here it states that Shopify Flow accesses store data by calling the GraphQL admin API, which means that we have access to nearly all the fields in that API. And that's awesome because then we can just browse the GraphQL admin API documentation and maybe we will already find suitable fields that we can use. Further, we can also try to leverage the AI assistant and talk through what kind of problem we're facing. Or we can also do a traditional Google search or search on the Shopify forum because a lot of the use cases are well documented at this point. In this example, we will try to use the GraphQL admin API documentation, so I'll just follow the link right here. And then inside the documentation, the first object I want to bring up is the order object itself, because that's the first object we get access to or immediate access to, because our flow starts whenever a new order is created. So then we can use the menu on the left, and I'll scroll down to orders and then objects. And somewhere in the sub menu here, we should find the order object. It's right here. So I'll bring that up. And on this details page, we find a full list of all the available fields related to the order object. And now we can try to find some clues about the customer who placed the order, or maybe also how many orders that customer placed in their lifetime. So I would just start browsing these different fields here. They are also sorted alphabetically. So let's try to find something related to the customer object. And we find an entry right here. So the data field is literally just called customer, the customer that placed the order. And we can also show additional fields that reveal more details about this customer. So here we find things like their address, the amount spent over the lifetime. And now we can try to find further useful properties that help us assess whether it's the first order or if it's a returning customer. So let's just keep browsing here. First name, not so useful. Last name, we don't need that. Last order. That could be interesting, but the last order doesn't really tell whether we had previous orders or not. Then we have customer meta fields. But then we find two properties that could be really interesting. For one, orders, which returns a list of all the customer's orders. Then we could check how long that list is. And if there's just one order in it, it's the first order. But the field above is even better, number of orders, because that immediately returns the number of orders that a customer made throughout their lifetime on a particular store. And then we wouldn't have to count anything or don't run any for loops. We can just take that number and see if it's equal to 1, then it would be the first order. And if it's greater than 1, then it must be a returning customer. Okay, I think this leaves us with a good starting point for our project. And now it's time to start building. During this project, we're using an agile software development approach. And we've already done a little bit of planning and designing. So now it's time to develop, test, deploy, and review. And then we can decide whether we need another round or if our new feature is ready to launch. Let's head over to our admin dashboard. And I want to bring up the Shopify Flow app. In this case, I'll just use the search bar, search for Shopify Flow. And if you have the app installed, it would appear right here. And otherwise, you might see the suggestions from the official app store and quickly have to install the app. So I'll do that right now. And once the installation is completed successfully, this is what the dashboard looks like. Now we can decide whether we want to create a workflow from scratch or use one of the pre-built templates. So Shopify also provides dozens of pre-built automations that we can use. We can also filter these. So let's say your company was also selling products B2B, and maybe you want to tag all B2B orders. Then we could use this workflow as a starting point. However, this time let's head back and go back to the dashboard because we want to create a workflow from scratch so that we can see the entire process end to end. Now we have to select our trigger. And remember, the trigger is supposed to start our workflow. And we've already researched that in advance. So the trigger we wanted to go with was called order created, the first one in the search results here. Okay, so far so good. I'll close out the details right here. Next, I'll add a second step. So I click on this small plus icon here next to then. And we can decide whether we want to add a condition to check something or test something or compare something, or whether we want to add an action in order to do something, perform an action. And in our case, it makes sense to add a condition first because we want to check if the order that was just created is also the very first order of that customer. So then inside this if block here, we can add a new variable. And here we have access to the order object, the same order object that we saw on the GraphQL API documentation. And we already know that this order object contains more info about the customer. So I'll reference the customer object here. And this in and of itself also contains further details. And somewhere in here, we should find the number of orders right here. And since this data field just returns a number, we can check if the number of orders is equal to 1, because then it would be the first order from that customer. Now in that case, so if this condition is true, then we want to tag the order. So next comes an action. And here I would just search for the action we want to take. So I'll write tag order and see what kind of results come up. Add draft order tags is the first one, doesn't quite match. So I would just look through the list. And a little further down, we should find add order tags. That sounds promising. I'll go with a descriptive one, first-order. Then after the order is tagged successfully, I want to add the free welcome gift, our free item, to that order. So I'll add another action. And let me first show you this right here. On this development store, I currently have 2 active products. It's a coffee brand. So the main product is coffee. And then as a welcome gift, we are giving away this small coffee scoop, which is awesome because that reminds the customer every time they make a coffee and it's good for retention. So then let's search for a suitable action to add an item to an existing order. And I'll tell you this one right away. It's called add order line item. So let's go ahead and add this one. And here we have to select the product variant that we want to add. Here I've already filtered this for my welcome gift. So I'll select this one. And further, we could also configure things like the quantity, like how many times this variant should be added, or whether we want to allow duplicates if this item is already in cart. For now, we can assume it's a hidden product everywhere else on the store. We also don't want to notify the customer because I think this one would be better as a surprise. So I'll leave everything else here on default and rather move on with the next step. So then the last step would be sending our internal notification email. I'll add another action to do that. And if we just search the keyword email, it should be among the first search results, send internal email. Perfect. Here we have to enter the email address, the email subject, and then lastly the email body. And also noteworthy, we can use liquid and liquid variables in here. So for example, here I customized the message a little bit and added the customer's first name. You have to decide whether this is too sensitive data to include in an email or not. Or I also added a link for quick access to that order. So here I extracted the order number and then combined it with the shop URL /admin/orders. So that link should get you directly to that new order. But of course, this is all optional and we will test it in 1 minute. But before we do that, let's take a final look at our new workflow and review everything. So when a new order is created, our workflow starts. Then we check how many orders that customer made in their lifetime. If it's 1, it must be the first order. So then we tag the order, we add our free welcome gift, and then we also send the internal email notification. And we also don't see any error messages or items that we need to review. That's another thing worth mentioning. Shopify Flow already gives you warnings if there's like a potential mismatch in data. I can also demonstrate this really quick. So for example, if we add a delete product block and we don't connect it to anything else, we get the small review flag here, and then it says, okay, this is an unconnected action. Or if we connect this block with our order create trigger, that also doesn't make too much sense, because in what case would you want to delete a product when an order is created? And we also see this info message here, product data not found, because Shopify Flow doesn't even know which product we're trying to reference here. And you can learn more about these different error messages in the official docs as well. Okay, so far so good. I'll remove this block again. So now we should be left with our hopefully working automation. That needs to be tested. So in the last step, I'll add a descriptive name. I'll call mine add welcome gift, and then we can turn our workflow on and see if it works in action. Now with our new workflow successfully saved, I'll head over to the front end because I want to create 2 test orders in order to simulate the first and second order of a new customer. As you can see, I have a few of these coffee variants in cart, and now I'll head to the checkout, enter all my info, and complete the same order twice. All right, so here I just completed the second test order. And now we can take a look at the data inside the Shopify admin. And the first thing I would like to look at is our new workflow inside the Flow app. So we have that right here. And it also states the last run was just 1 minute ago. So I'll click into that. And at the bottom, we can find the recent runs and also some more details, what happened during that run. The first one happened 2 minutes ago. That was the first test order that I made. And for this run, we completed 3 actions in total. And during the second run, my second test order, we didn't complete any actions. So that's a good sign to me. And if you want to see more details, you can also click into these runs here, because then we can review each individual step and also see what kind of data went in and out. So for example, here we can see that everything started with our trigger, order created. Then we had the first condition. If the number of orders for that customer is equal to 1, then we want to continue. This was evaluated to true. And then we added the order tags, we added the line item to the order, and we sent our internal email notification. And if we click into one of these blocks here, we can also see what kind of data went in and out. So for example, this is the order that triggered our workflow initially. And on the right side, we see all the data that we requested during this run, like the number of orders for this specific customer. So this is extremely helpful if you ever need to debug an automation, or if you want to analyze why something happened the way it did. And if you need to make changes to your workflow, you can go ahead and do so, and then come back and even retry the run. So that is to say, execute the new workflow or your adjusted workflow with the same data that we had during this run right here. And then you can see whether you get the expected results. We can also take one final look at the email notification that went through successfully. And it also contains the quick link that should get us directly to that order. Let's try that out. So here we are back in the admin dashboard, and we can see that the coffee scoop was successfully added to this order. Awesome. All right, and that's it for this lesson. I feel we've come a super long way here. We've seen how to research the right triggers and data fields for your automation. We've seen how to build a flow from scratch end to end, and best practices for testing and debugging your automations. And I truly hope this was helpful, and I wish you a ton of fun in your continued coding journey. That's it from my end. Bye.